Hello, you're very welcome to the week that really was with John McGurk and Sarah Ryan. It is the 7th of September 2023. I, for one, am scorched. It's very, very hot, which prompted an article from RTE today to point out that we're going to have scorching Septembers from now on because of climate change. And if it was very wet, I suspect we'd have an article in RTE saying we're going to have very wet Septembers because of climate change. That's just the way the thing works. Am I being cynical there, Sarah? How are you?
And Grant, have we not always had really nice? I mean, does anyone Irish not just basically associate going back to school with scorching
It's
weather?
the universal law of good weather. We get good weather twice a year, exactly. I mean, 2 weeks when the leaving cert is on, and
Yeah,
2 weeks when the kids and the teachers go back to school.
yes,
No one who's a student of Irish weather could miss this. Nothing to do with
yeah,
climate change. It's
exactly.
the heavens opening. I want to start the show, Sarah, but doing something we don't do enough of. In fact, up until now, haven't done any of it. And somebody called Jim Banda on YouTube last week gave me a spanking and said it was very disappointing that we just ignore questions people leave for us in the YouTube comments or indeed in other places. And the truth is, folks, we haven't been ignoring those questions as such. It just hasn't occurred to us to speak about them. And that I want to apologize for. That was a mistake. We should have been doing that. So just to say, on last week's show, we got a number of comments in, Sarah, but a lot of people were a bit critical of you for your perceived defense of Andrew Tate, saying that he's a misogynist, lying, pimp, other words, and you listened to 3 hours of him chatting, and you seemed a bit too friendly for him. But I don't think you were actually defending. You weren't saying he's great. You were just saying everyone has different sides to them.
Yeah, I wasn't saying he was great. I was saying that it was an interesting interview and gave a different perspective, and that I came away from it feeling like he had some understanding of the power that he had, which is a comfort, and that some of the stuff was old, and he seemed to have had some level of self-reflection. Like, he also converted to Islam, and he talked a lot about religion, and I just like he just was a little bit more evolved in his thinking and not a complete Neanderthal that I thought he was. Like,
I mean, the gist of your reaction is basically, as I understand it, you went in to watch this thing expecting to come across a dribbling, slavering, woman-hating, misogynist,
yeah,
racist, and then
yeah.
he was slightly less bad than that, and you were like, oh, yeah, he won the expectations game with you. Is that?
But also, like, John, it comes back to the base point that I make all the time, which is saying that you watched an interview with somebody, or that you saw their point on one thing or whatever, doesn't mean you agree with everything they've ever said or done. And this is where people come a cropper all the time. Like, I don't think, like for example, I also talked last, and I'm obviously not drawing comparison between these two people, but Duncan Smith, a Labour TD, I don't think that he's right about anything he's ever thought politically, but I think he's still a decent person. Now, I don't necessarily agree with everything that Andrew Tate does, and I also don't think he's a decent person, but I can still have a different view from him, like, about him from watching one interview. Doesn't mean there's just this obsession with that, like, people think that you endorse everything this person has ever said or done by agreeing with them on one point. Like, I don't agree with myself on things I thought 6 months ago. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's like, I take the point that, if people felt I was agreeing with him, maybe that's the impression I gave. I don't agree with everything he does, and I think he's problematic in loads of ways. But I think he's evolving, which is more than I can say for a lot of people that I see and being interviewed, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's fair, and I hope that answers the various comments we got in on that point. I thought it was interesting. There weren't that many defending Andrew Tate. Normally we get a few more than that on that topic. Somebody else mentioned that they thought the purpose of the university hospital, this is very cynical now, I can't believe somebody said this, was to push Trinity College up the university rankings because, of course, massive children's hospital, biggest medical facility in the world, training facility for medical students from, I don't think it's just Trinity though, but that's a very cynical, excuse me, way of looking at the world. And another person said, why are we worried about 2.5 billion when we're spending 5 billion on Ukrainian refugees, which is a fair point. But I think you can make that point about literally anything. I mean, why build roads when we're spending 5 billion on Ukrainian refugees? I mean, you have to look at issues separately. I think. Anyway,
Yeah.
that's enough of last week. What did you make of this week, Sarah?
Oh, which part? Which thing?
Well, I think we start with the bit where I know now you're a bit of a girl racer like me, so like you're going to be constrained by the government. They're going to reduce the speed limits to save lives on Irish
No prison
roads.
can hold me, John. No prison can hold me. I drove Keith's car once years ago, and one of the cover of one of the wing mirrors came off because I was driving so fast. I won't say the number. And he was like, "This literally blew off from like velocity or whatever." And never with the kids in the car, but I am a very fast driver, to say the least. So, yeah.
We'll have to get you. I have to get you to, and maybe we should do this. Like maybe we should do this as an event, like for listeners of the podcast or indeed Gript people. Gary's going to kill me. Gary Kavanagh, who like handles all our events, is going to kill me. Maybe we should organize like a go-karting day out, because this fixed me, right? When I was like 18, 19, 20, I was the classic boy racer. I mean, I'm not embarrassed to say it. Well, I am embarrassed to say.
Oh my God, did you do stuff to your car?
No, never. No, none of that. I just drove it really fast. Like I am, like I know every guy says this, but I am legit a good driver. Like, legit.
Oh my God.
No. When I say good, I don't mean obeying rules of the road good. I mean like fast. So anyway,
but there's definitely been times when I've met up with you in Dublin, and then you've been talking about going home, and then you've described how long it took you to get home, and I've done a quiet or a fast mathematical equation in my brain and thought he could die someday.
Well, I have to say, since I got into proper karting, I'm much. I now like have in my head, and since I've gotten older, this is not a recent thing, right? So just don't. It's not the last week I decided to cop on, but like basically from when I met my wife, actually, so about 10 years ago, when I realized that dying has consequences. I'm a safer driver on the road now, but like I still have the ability to go onto a karting track, and there's a good one in Limerick. There's a couple of good ones around the country, and have fun. So we have to get you on one, is my point. But,
I definitely changed myself as well. Like I used to be, really into even like fairgrounds, like roller coasters and stuff like that. And since I had kids, I find it kind of deeply unpleasant. Like I don't like anything like that. And when I tell you, like, the mad stuff I did when I was young. And I remember distinctly, like when I went traveling around the world doing stuff and thinking, oh, I could die, and that'll be really sad for my family. And it just completely changed my perspective then when I met Keith and I had kids. And now I'm like, no, I'm not going to do scary stuff because I need to stay alive for my kids. Also, I've seen some of the women that Keith went out with before me, and his taste is so poor. I couldn't run the risk of any of them being involved in my children after my death. So.
That is true. Yeah, you have to look out for them there. I find though, as well as I get older, I just realize that there are so many more ways to die. I'm much more conscious of it. I think when you're 21, 22, even 25, you kind of think of yourself as immortal. And particularly as a young man, like you don't realize the very many ways there are to die. My wife laughs at me. Everyone, our dishwasher, everyone normally, I think most people have a dishwasher where there are drawers that pull out, right? She's an awful habit of putting knives in it with the dishwasher drawer out at the bottom and the knives sticking up. And I'm like, somebody could fall and land on one of those knives. And
she's doing it on purpose.
Maybe she's doing it. Maybe she's hoping. But I just think that would never have occurred to you when I was younger. And I think as you get older, you get more safety conscious. But all of that leads me to believe that the government's policy of reducing speed limits is a nonsense. Because I mean, when I was a young and dangerous driver, I didn't obey the speed limits. I mean, I would if I saw a cop car or if I saw a speed van, I would obey them. But like, get me on a rural road with kind of like good corners on it. I mean, good corners in terms of like if you're an idiot and you want to drive fast and have fun going around corners and no cops in sight. I wasn't obeying that. And I don't think I was alone. I think there's a lot of, because I still meet them on the roads, the kind of like people who were me at 21, 22. They're still out there. I don't think speed limits are going to affect how they behave.
No, it's, I don't know. I mean, I think it's just another example of the government. Here's the problem, if it even is a problem, because the numbers have gone if you account for the increase in population. But anyway, here's the problem. Here's something. Let's seem to be doing something. This is something. Let's do this.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same old, same old. And like, there's no way that like what the figures that came out in such close proximity to the announcement that there's no way that wasn't already planned anyway.
Well,
do you know what I mean?
It was, because the Independent told us today. So you just need to read Hugh O'Connell in the Independent, I think it was yesterday, who was reporting on this is obviously the result of a commission that has looked at speed limits over a period of time. But down in paragraph 14 of Hugh's piece, he didn't put it at the top. I think he should have, because I think it's quite newsworthy and of interest to people, is that commission was looking at three things, of which road safety was only one. They were also looking at something called transport utility and emissions. Those are the two things: transport utility and emissions. So, I mean, obviously, we know that if you drive your car a little bit slowly, you use a little bit less fuel and therefore presumably emit a little bit less CO2. And then transport utility, I have to say, hand on heart, I don't know what that refers to, but I think what I think it's about is the government's policy of trying to get people out of their cars and onto public transport. And I think if you take like already traffic black spots and you make the speed limit a little bit slower and then you make driving a little bit less pleasant, then eventually you see car sales falling and more people opting for the Lewis or the bus or whatever in Dublin. I think there's a huge element of this to it. I mean, nobody makes it a secret. Dublin City Council have been trying to get people out of their cars and by making life and traffic in the city miserable for years.
Oh, for sure. And like we've discussed that before, like I live in Malahide, getting into town, not on public transport, driving or whatever, has gone from being like outside of, obviously I'm not talking about rush hour morning or evening, but like outside of rush hour traffic, I used to be able to very easily get from Malahide into the city centre in 30 minutes. Mm-hmm. And now most of the time it's an hour. And that's because this street is closed. This street is now one way. You can't go this way. You can't go that way. You can't go, Fairview in front of the park and all that. You can't go that way anymore. Like, it's absurd and it's entirely designed. And the problem is, John, that like it's all very well. Like if I was going to meet actually friends a couple of weeks ago, and I get the Dart, like no hassle. It was a Saturday. I was going in to meet people for the early dinner and jumped on the Dart, went in and met them. Fine. But if I have like a 1.5-year-old and my kids are at school, mm-hmm. and like I'm not going, and I say I'm going in to get Christmas stuff, let's just say for argument's sake, toys, big stuff. There's no way I'm not driving into town. Like I'm not getting a buggy and big boxes. I won't be able to do it, blah, 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 blah. So what ends up happening really simply, and you can see it, and I know people who own businesses in town who've said it to me, what ends up happening is, even though I love town and I love Grafton Street and I love O'Connell Street and I love Arnott's and all that kind of stuff, ultimately at the end of the day, I just end up saying, you know what, I'll go to Swords, I'll go to Blanchardstown. It's free to park. There's no hassle. And the business is just lost in town. And that's mm-hmm. They're just being strangled by that. And I'm not against the Dart or whatever. I think the bus routes in Dublin, depending on what the route is, for the most part, leave a lot to be desired. But the Dart is an incredible service. But there just needs to be more of them. But they just don't always work. And
it's an incredible service for people who live along the line.
Yeah,
but the Dart is absolutely of no use to those of us who live in Tipperary and want to come to Dublin and get around it for a day. I mean,
yeah,
okay, so there's the Lewis Park and Ride. There's two Lewis lines effectively, but the Dart is only really of any use to a visitor from Dublin if they're on the Dart line. I mean, this comes back to what we were saying on last week's show about metros in other European cities. I mean, the lack of a sort of fast-moving rail public transport system means that you can't really operate in Dublin without a car, in my opinion. Certainly coming from outside Dublin. Okay, maybe if you live in the city centre, it's a different story. But that's why, like you, if I want to go and do my shopping, I go to a big shopping centre, like the one in Blanchardstown or the one in Liffey Valley or the one in Dundrum, rather than the city centre. And I don't see how all these new speed limits are going to improve that situation. I think if you just make it harder for people to get around the country, they will find ways of, they'll adapt in ways that won't help your economy. is my
But
thinking.
but isn't that the underlying issue with so many things? We'll tinker with this small thing without any consideration of the long-term consequence, the knock-on effect on X, Y, and Z. We'll do this to hotels and not wonder about why price of hotels go up. We'll put people into these areas with no services around them and wonder why, whatever. Like we'll like some of the housing of Ukrainians and stuff in hotels, or homeless people in hotels, has had knock-on effects for like small businesses in those areas. Do you know what I mean? So like no one thinks about these things long term.
Who are you telling? We have a Gript free speech conference in the RDS on next weekend, not this weekend after the 7th of September. It was on the 16th of September on Saturday. And just last week I was booking a hotel for 2 nights in the city centre. I nearly had to call in the bank for a loan. It was outrageous. Like a fairly bog standard 4-star hotel, not a name hotel, just a relatively standard 4-star hotel in Dublin. I was quoted for 2 nights, €780, which is astonishing. And I mean,
I can remember a time where like €750 could have gotten you like 2 nights in the Shelburne a few years ago.
Yeah, 100%. I dreaded that. I didn't even check the Shelburne, obviously, or the Marion or any of the other finer hotels. I mean, this is a relatively bog standard, like targeted at business people hotel. I won't name it because that's not fair. And I didn't, but like the prices were. I mean, I know because I've stayed in that hotel over a long number of years. If I've been in Dublin, and I know like 2 years ago that would have been half the price for 2 nights. So this is where we're at in the country. And I think that it brings us on to a topic we wanted to talk about a little bit, because I thought it was very funny this week that the Ukrainian embassy is telling Ukrainians not to come to Ireland. It's saying they're under huge pressure in Ireland. They didn't quite say Ireland is full, but they said you're under huge pressure, lads. Maybe don't come. At the same time, the Irish government is saying, "Oh, it's absolutely fine. In fact, what we're going to do is the electric picnic is over this weekend, so we'll just keep the tents in place and put a few thousand people living in a field in Stradbally." That's where we're at. I mean, what's your take on that? Before I gather mine from my tongue.
First of all, like I went to electric picnic once and made a friend come down and get me. It was so horrifying, and I'm not a festival person. I hate festivals.
I went once. I lasted half a day.
Yeah, no, that's what happened. I went down on the first day, and I don't think it would come as much of a screaming surprise to anybody who has met me. But I hung around with a lot of boys growing up. Like I've mostly male cousins and one brother, one sister. But a lot of the lads, I went traveling with lads the first time and whatever. So I went down with the lads and I was just so disgusting, and it was raining and it was cold, and I had a friend at the time who was sitting in on the Saturday night, that night at about 12:30, 1 o'clock. I was like, "Can you come and get me?" And he was like, "Oh, it's going to take me about an hour and a half to drive down." And I was like, "It's fine, I'll start walking." And I literally just left. I couldn't bear it. So like I think it's inhumane for someone to arrive from a war-torn country and to put them into a tent in a field. Like that is by definition a demonstration that you have run out of space.
It's extraordinary. Before I tell you this is my own electric picnic story, I went a couple of years ago. Nisha Nunn, who's an old friend of mine, runs the Minefield, which is like it's supposed to be the debating section at Electric Picnic, but I don't think there's much debate there allowed these days. I think it's more the sort of preachy section now. But in those days, there was a little bit of debate allowed. So I went there. I went and lasted, I think there was a debate for half an hour. And then I was on Today FM with Matt Cooper, that was broadcasting from the festival. And Ed Sheeran was also on. And we had had a drink before we went on. He was singing a song. I was taking part in some panel. And then afterwards, the place just was just really unpleasant. It was wet and cold, and there was some dreadful noise coming from the stage. And I said, I'm going home. But to this day, my younger nieces and nephews, I get to dine out on the story that I met Ed Sheeran. So it wasn't all bad.
Oh, but so cool.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I had no idea who the bloke was actually at the time. But back to the topic of the accommodation. I mean, what more is there to add than that? I mean, we're asking people to live in a field and calling it compassion and how great we are. It's. I mean, if you think, Sarah, I mean, if you go to the festival, what do you not have at the festival? I mean, okay, so there's portaloos, but there's no showers. Where do you wash your clothes? Where do the kids get picked up if there's? I presume they're not putting kids there, but like they can't because how could those kids go to school? But how do you get to the shops? What's your transportation? Where does the food come from? Are all the food vans remaining? Are they still charging festival prices to people who are refugees? It's just I can't
No,
see it. I can't see it working.
but it's the fact that like they're willing, like that Roger O'Gorman is willing to say, yeah, we're not ruling out people putting people into tents, but like with a straight face, without admitting that like maybe this is, there's a problem here. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't think that that's humane at all to somebody. And,
But on a more fundamental level, why do you think it is that the Ukrainian government can say to its people, there's no room in Ireland, but the Irish government feels that there's no way it could say that to its own people or to Ukrainian people? What's happening there? I mean,
because we have a culture in Ireland of it doesn't matter what it is, it just matters what it looks like. It matters that we look compassionate and that we're the best boys in the class and we will fulfill whatever obligations, we supposedly have. And, that's what matters. And it's nothing to do with the reality. And we do that about loads of things, John.
First of all, apologies to listeners if you heard a dog barking there. My dog has decided that there's something terribly wrong. So okay. We record these things as live. These things sometimes happen. I think she's calmed down a little bit now. But I think you're right. And I think there's also an element of it whereby they're terrified of, they're in so deep now that if they admit for 1 second that actually maybe we have run out of space, they're terrified of being seen to give aid and comfort to the dreaded far right.
Yeah.
There's this fear of if we admit that the country is full or we don't have room for any more people, well, that'll mean that all those dreadful people protesting have a point and they're correct. And I think they would much rather plow on and pretend everything's okay than admit that they might have gotten it even a little bit wrong. And that's a problem because ultimately I'm not entirely sure where that ends. It doesn't end well, I don't suspect it, but we'll have to find out.
Oh, it's like loads of other things. They just hope that something else comes along and we all get distracted.
So that was it. But anyway, on the electric picnic, at least the lads who are moving in, being Ukrainians, I mean, they won't be singing Up the Ra.
So, okay, overall, my opinion on this is, as a 40-year-old Irish woman, this has not been going on since, forever.
So for those people who didn't notice, first of all, I mean, last week at the electric picnic, the Wolf Tones were there. They did their little medley of whatever it is the Wolf Tones sing. And one of those songs involves people chanting "Ooh ah up the Ra" in the middle of the chorus or something. And apparently there were like 10,000 people outside the tent where they were singing who didn't hear the rest of the song, who just went along to sing the "Ooh ah up the Ra" bit. Sarah Carey from The Independent was there on Sunday and wrote a piece in the Belfast Telegraph about it, expressing her horror on it. And her reaction was not alone. There were a lot of people horrified by this, but you're saying it's nothing to worry about.
I just think it's a bit like pearl clutching, about nothing. Like young people have had drunken Republican ideals coming out of their veins since forever. There's the Fields of Athenry song used to be sung at discos. It had its own inserts. Half the world, we have a big culture of going traveling around the world, and most people I knew when I was traveling became super hardcore, kind of lovers of Ireland and everything. Everything Irish when they left Ireland, if you know what I mean. It would be all romantic and telling the stories, over campfires with foreigners about our terrible, our terrible past, whatever. You do, it's all oh, Tommy, get leaving Ireland. And then it's,
then they come home and they're half American.
Yeah, exactly. But that's I just think that Wolf Towns, I mean, my brother is a year younger than me. He used to listen to the Wolf Towns when we were 15. Do you know what I mean? This isn't new. It's just people getting absolutely, like I said, pearl clutching about nothing. They're a band. They've been around for I don't even know how long the Wolftones have been around. Look, long time. Those songs are old. I don't know what the big deal is. And young people, it's almost like a symptom of privilege. Like they've nothing to be worried about. So they, like to have a jig around to some old Irish songs. Big deal.
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying about the Fields of Athenry rings true, because I mean, when I was in teenage discos, making horrendously unsuccessful attempts to pull girls in like 15, 16, 14, whatever it was, like horrendously unsuccessful. I mean, like, but I don't even. But I have a vague memory of that song used to come on, and it might be connected to my inability to pull girls at the time. That I was just one of those people who absolutely, because I've always been a bit of an arsehole, refused to sing those words. I would stand there, mouth pursed together, saying, "I am not endorsing that horrendous stuff."
Well, I think there could be some correlation there, all right.
Probably was.
But
Probably was.
I sang it and didn't even know what I was saying because I was, you know what I mean, sang it, and then I literally can remember suddenly one day going, "Oh, what am I saying here? Oh, okay, I think I'll stop that." But I just think, like, listen, like with all the stuff that's going on, if young people are listening to a few Wolftown songs, is the biggest problem that we have with our youth. Like let's consider ourselves to be pretty lucky. I just don't see what the big deal is. I think it's still a bit of silly season, and people are getting their knickers in a twist.
You have a luxury here that I don't have, right? You have a luxury in that you're just a normal person who's allowed a normal person's reaction to things, whereas I have to write about this stuff for a living. I have to have opinions on it. I have to like come up with an opinion that no one else has. So I can't just write the Sarah Carey "This is disgraceful" piece, even though I thought it was very well written, and I can't just write the piece that you read somewhere else going, "Oh, it's grand, doesn't be worried about." I have to find like something unique to say.
A hot take, yeah.
A hot take, exactly. It's the pressure. I mean, I should say I'm not trying to mock what I do, because I do put thought into things I write. But what I was thinking this week was like, it's obviously it's not new. It's a very old form of rebellion. Young people kind of trying to shock their elders. Right? You go back to Woodstock in the '60s, or various musical festivals in the hippie age, and like there was like all sorts of shocking things said and done. You go back to the free love era. You go back to the gay rights campaigns. It's all about rebelling against the establishment that you live in, right? Except young Irish people these days don't really have much to rebel against, because no matter what they say, if they say, well, actually, I think there's 78 genders, or
furries aren't getting enough attention.
Furries aren't getting enough attention. The government is likely to say, no, I actually, that's a good point. So it's very hard to shock the Irish establishment these days. So the only thing they've got left is, the row or a great bunch of lads. So I think there's an element to that's why it's being embraced as a kind of shock the world kind of a thing. Maybe I'm totally off base, and maybe that's just the pressure of coming up with an angle on it. But I think there's something to it the more I think about it, because I mean there's very little left if you want to be a young Irish person and rebel. And if you want to be a young Irish person and just be purely nationalist, I mean, the soccer team is not worth talking about. You're in a housing crisis. You're probably living with mum and dad. There are very few positive kinds of nationalism at the moment to get your head around. That's the other thing.
Yeah, fair enough. But I just still wouldn't. I don't even think it translates as, into any kind of anything to be worried about. I think it's just nothing. I mean, like I think I said before on the podcast, that one of the things that made me laugh, and like it's so true as well, was an interview with Jordan Peterson one time where he said that the way that he stopped all the protests at his visits to universities was he started having his talks at 9 o'clock in the morning. And like, do you know what I mean? Like, so like this isn't going to turn into Sinn Féin votes. This isn't going to turn into like anything. It's just a concert. No big deal. That's my take. And it's been going on forever. Like, this romantic idea, and they haven't got a clue about what, about a 5-second conversation with most of those people would show that they actually don't really know.
Yeah, no, you're completely correct about that. I do think it's interesting on the broader topic, though, of I saw Leo Varadkar saying today that he thinks that he united Ireland in his lifetime. I still think he's wrong about that. And the reason I think he's wrong about that is because, I mean, obviously, I'm not imputing from some 23-year-old woman at the Electric Picnic singing "Ooh Up the Ra" to the broader debate. But I do think there's a point there whereby Irish nationalism in the modern era, it seems to me to be sort of almost incapable of considering the point of view of others and how that might offend people, or how that might make a unionist, or not a unionist, somebody who's on the fence sitting in North Down thinking, no real emotional attachment to the UK, but not pushed about United Ireland. And they see a country where there are 10,000 people singing that, and they don't know what you and I know, which is that it's just a bit of casual BS because there's nothing else to sing. They might take it slightly differently, and I think there's an unwillingness to consider those angles for all the discussion about United Ireland.
Oh, for sure. And there's also, I mean, there's an entire podcast in that, like, about how, there's levels of maturity that will be required, and there'll be concessions that people have absolutely no comprehension of that will be required in order for that to work. And it's all very romantic and everything, but like flags, anthems, things like this, you know what I mean? Like, and people will have to get their head around that if that's what they want. And there's a maturing that'll have to happen about those do you think
things. There's also an element with these things that people like the fight for the thing more than they like the thing when they get it? Like, so that if you got a United Ireland in the morning, I mean, where does your grievance go?
Oh my God. Is that not like, did you just, this happened before in this podcast, John, where you accidentally stumbled onto the most profound underlying theme behind about 90% of the things that have happened in Ireland in the last 20 years.
I was about to say, because that's my experience of the last 20 years. I mean, you get gay marriage legalized. I voted for it, happy to vote for it on the grounds of it. But those big celebrations, like, Ireland had stepped into a new era, and abortion passed, massive celebrations in Dublin Castle, evil Catholic Church defeated, or as somebody shouted to me across the street in Limerick about a week later, McGurk in the mud. You're great, tremendous victory. And then 6 months later, like, the sugar high is gone and you're looking for something else to be annoyed about. I think there's an element of that with United Ireland. I think if you get it, all of a sudden, I mean, what you blame the Brits for then?
Well, this is what I'm saying. But like, yeah, I don't know. It would remain to be seen, but I think it's a way more complicated debate. And like, do you know what's funny actually? Was that, and I'm speaking in absolutes now, and obviously there was people who thought about this and there was consideration given, but the small amount, from my perspective, of thought that was given to the implications of Brexit for the Northern Ireland before it happened was a real demonstration of like how people aren't really thinking that much about the long-term implications of certain things. Do you follow? Like, so just a lot of things. I mean, I appreciate that people, expected that Brexit wouldn't happen, or wouldn't be voted for, I mean, should I say. But when it was, there was a lot of people I saw, on TV and kind of going, oh yeah, what about that now?
I have to say, I thought it would pass. I remember, and in fact, I'm on record. People always say I'm terrible at predicting things. I predicted the day before the referendum, 52-48, in writing, in public, so no one can take that away from me. And the reason I predicted it was because you look at everything, Sarah, that happens in the world, from the repeal the 8th referendum here, to the Trump election, to Brexit. The side in politics that has emotion on its side always wins, and the side these days that has logic, or where the case, not that it has solely got logic on its side, but where the case is more logical, loses. Like, that's just the era we live in. If you can get
by that rationale, do you think that Donald Trump will get re-elected?
I think the issue with him is that there's a huge emotional case against him now as well, which there wasn't before. So I mean, he in 2020, people are saying, how did Joe Biden get 81 million votes? I mean, there weren't 81 million votes for Joe Biden. There was a whole lot of people who came out to vote specifically against Trump and what he is perceived to stand for. And I say perceived to stand for because there's a reasonable case to make he gets a hard time, but a lot of that's of his own making. So I mean, I could be wrong. I could be, because there's clearly an emotional case for Trump as well. We'll find out.
But John, if you were right about the Brexit thing and you read it as right, why do you not have that in your Twitter bio?
What about how I call Brexit right?
Yeah, like, why don't you have it as your profile photo or something?
Because that'd be lame, wouldn't it?
No, I would enjoy it. I would enjoy it.
I think he'd let me because, like, to be fair, I've had some stinkers. I thought Mitt Romney would beat Barack Obama in 2012. And
Did you?
I did. I got that one completely wrong. That's where I learned the lesson about emotion and logic. Because that's
I
where,
like Mitt Romney though.
yeah. Well, at the time, everyone liked him. Now on the right, he's kind of a traitor because he doesn't like Donald Trump. But I think he's just a really decent bloke.
I do too. I like him. I think he's a nice man.
He was right about a lot of things as well in that campaign. I mean, famously about the how Russia was the US's biggest geopolitical foe, for which he was laughed at. And I
They
mean,
all laughed at him.
yeah, they all, do you remember that? They all laughed at him for saying that. And I mean, obviously you can disagree who's in the right and who's the wrong on various issues between the US and the Russians, but you can't disagree that Romney was right to identify the biggest threat there. But they all laughed at him because politics is ultimately, in the era we live in, it's emotional rather than logical. Anyway, we might leave it there for this week. I was going to ask you.
No, real quick, you wanted to ask me about this this woman in America, the podcaster.
I did because I saw this week. So I just gonna hand the story over to you. You tell us the story because it's a bit mad.
Okay, so this story is about a woman whose name will come to me in 20 seconds because it was in my head and now it's gone because I was very shocked at it. But effectively, it's about a woman who was doing Ruby Frankie is her name. She's a YouTuber, a family YouTuber, and she was doing videos. One of these people who films their family life and blah 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 blah.
Making cookies and that sort of stuff. Like,
well, yeah, but she was, like watch me make the kids lunches and that kind of thing. And but she kind of went semi-viral a few times because of her let's suffice to say, or put it mildly, harsh punishment for her kids. And so she's been arrested and she has 2 counts of felony child abuse.
So were the harsh punishments on the YouTube? Like, was it because I know
the background
of this is like she's obviously, and this is no reflection on her faith at all, but she is, and her family were devout Mormons. She's got 6 kids. They live in Utah. That was kind of the odd quirkiness. It was like, look at a different way of living life. And I was familiar with the fact that she kind of like made cookies and like did family sing-alongs and they played their musical instruments and all very idyllic. But I didn't know there was a harsh punishment angle to it. Obviously, it makes sense. No one wants to come out.
So, like, basically, and I'll preface this by saying, by the way, that like I'm kind of not a parent who is averse to punishments. And at the moment, we're on week 2 of an iPad and any electrical device ban for boldness at bedtime. So it's not like, you know what I mean. I think a lot of and I was talking about this with a friend of mine recently, like, you're inundated with all these different parenting methods and, soft parenting and, like negotiating or whatever. Like, I'm sorry, but like I have 2 boys and a girl. Boys are 4 and 6. A lot of the time they're absolutely feral and there's no talking to them. They don't listen to reason and I don't hit my kids. So, like, I have to manage my parenting with, like taking things away and punishments and, whatever. So I'm not.
No. I don't have kids, but I got to say, I mean, like, all I know about kids is you got to rule them like a king. I mean, you can negotiate with them when they're 22 and 23 and wondering if they're allowed an iPhone yet. But that was a joke. But until that point, no.
And there's like, so I like. I mean, that's the way I was brought up. Loads of our house is the house on the road where, like, kids congregate. It's just happened that way. Like, there'd be loads of kids in our house. And I always say kids are welcome to be here anytime, but I'm just letting you know in advance that, like, if they're all being bold, I give out to them the same. I don't coddle. You know what I mean? Like, I'd say you're all bullying this one person. You can get out if you're going to do that, whatever. So I'm not into that soft thing of like negotiating and nonsense. I'm never, ever, ever cruel to my kids, ever. But I do chastise them for things. I don't let them away with things. And I think that, like, my responsibility is to turn them into people. You know what I mean? And also, like, I was speaking about this with somebody recently. Like, sometimes, John, like, especially in the summer in July, like when it was raining every day or whatever, like sometimes I flip the lid and like, and I was talking to a friend of mine about this and I was like, but maybe it's good for kids to understand that if they push and push and push and push and push, that people are human. Now, I'd say to them afterwards, I'm sorry that I got so annoyed, but, you know, here's why, whatever. Like, maybe it's good for kids to not find out at their first job, you know, when they're 24, that people have their limits and you can't just keep pushing them and being bolder and bolder and bolder and bolder. And then, you know, finding out that like people, you know, might flip the lid. So suffice to say, like I'm not averse to harsh parenting to a point.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, I know I'm stopping you from getting to your point about Ruby Frankie, but like kids do have to be a little bit afraid of their parents. I mean, yeah. Like when you were younger, do you remember like a common thing that our generation would say was like, yeah, my ma will kill me. And like, okay, it was mostly metaphorical, but there's got to be a little bit of fear there. If there's no fear, then there's no consequences. So
these kids these days have so much more there's so much more noise, and they're like, I can literally remember being a kid and saying Jesus Christ about something in front of the kids on the road and begging them not to tell my dad that I'd said that, because he would have absolutely gone bananas. He didn't like any kind of, you know, profanity in his mind. Like you just wouldn't even dream of it, and you were afraid. And during July, I remember I bought these new duvet covers for the kids. And they came down the next morning. They were both in a foul mood because it was raining. There was nothing to do. And I said, I put the new duvet covers on the beds the night before. And I said, how was it to sleep in nice new bed clothes though? And the six, nearly 7-year-old went, shit. I was like, excuse me? Did that just happen? Like, did I just have a turn? Or did that seriously just happen? And then he was kind of looking at me like, oh no. But like, you know what I mean? It's my job to not let him turn out to be an a-hole. So like, whatever. However, I and my sister actually were aware of this woman before this all happened. And some of it was very anxiety inducing and very like abusive, in my opinion.
Give us an example.
Taking a 12-year-old's bed for months, and he had to sleep on a beanbag on the floor.
Yeah, that's not
like no lunch. It's your job to make your own lunch, like to a 5-year-old. John, honestly, I mean, like the idea that either of my kids, he's nearly 7, he'll be 7 in 2 weeks, and 4, nearly 5, would make their own lunches is laughable. First of all, I mean, just absurd.
But like you'd have to clean up the kitchen after them, I presume, which would be.
It'd be like there'd been a burglary. It's like there's been a burglary if they try and make their own. Like they love to think they're making their own cereal, and it's a hellscape for me afterwards. But
I'm 40, and when I try to eat my own cereal, my wife sometimes says it looks like there's been an explosion. So okay,
so obviously not just a child thing. But do you leave your bowl in the sink to steep like Keith does? Anyway.
No comment.
Cereal doesn't need to steep, John. Anyway, so yeah, like not letting them, no beds, like weird, cruel punishments, like taking things away from them for long periods of time, you know, no lunch, no dinner, cruelty. I mean, effectively it was cruelty. And so she was, one of the children escaped the house and went to a neighbour's house and asked for food. And the neighbour noticed that there was duct tape around the wrists and called the police. And now a number of people, including a sister-in-law, have come out and said that they've been on to authorities for a couple of years, begging them to do something about the fact that this was an abusive household. So it's kind of interesting, but she like prided herself on, you know, this kind of like harsh, like I run a tight ship. This is you know, like they're not allowed to do this, they're not allowed to do that. They understand consequences or whatever. And like, there's, you know, there's also an age thing. Like I even noticed it with the boys, like one's nearly 7, one's nearly 5. The 7-year-old, you could say, if you do this again, you will not get your iPad. we don't let them have iPads during the week, but they're allowed to have iPads at the weekend.
Mhm.
You will not get your iPad this weekend if you do that again. He does it again, no iPad. And he kind of gets that. But I noticed that the 4-year-old doesn't really, like, he just doesn't think, like, a week to him is like 4 years. You know what I mean? There's no, he doesn't have the same concept of time as his brother. And so some of her punishments for like really small kids were absurd. And she kind of made a lifestyle or a living out of this, like putting her family online and whatever. And it's obviously spectacularly blown up in her face, but probably good news for the kids.
It's funny, like the popularity of that stuff, I think, is a reflection on sort of where we're at as a society. Because one of the things that I find really frustrating in society at the moment in general is moderation is almost kind of a dirty word. Like everything is, if you're not extreme on one side, there's a flip to the extreme on the other side. Like obviously there's a huge case out there for what you might call more old-fashioned parenting. There is, I think, as a non-parent, just observing society, I think there's an issue certainly with a lack of discipline for kids. But then of course somebody comes along and suggests this massive overcorrection. It's like it's very similar to Andrew Tate and that whole kind of men's rights movement in a way where yes, there's a sense that kind of young men are a bit lost and alone in society. And yet here along comes a guy who says the way to reclaim yourself is to be an absolute dickhead to women.
Yeah. Like
there's it's like there's this, like for every reaction there's an equal and massively overblown opposite reaction. I mean, I'm not articulating that as fluently as I would if I thought about it in more detail, but I think there's something there.
And I think you're absolutely right. But I think as well, like I'm always, kind of cautiously skeptical enough about people who are so confident in their method. Like ultimately, like I don't know, like I'm doing my best as a parent. I have certain things like that I never cruel to my kids. I have certain things that like I get right, and I have certain things I'm simply going to get wrong, right? And like that's just the way parenting goes. Most people are doing their best, and people get things right and people get things wrong, and you hope that they don't have some core memory of the day you flipped your lid, you know what I mean, and don't remember the nice bed sheets and the things you bought them and the times you were not, you know what I mean, brought them to nice places, like whatever. But like, at the end of the day, everybody's doing their best. But if you're like so absolutely certain that your parenting style is the absolute best and all the other ones are wrong, I would always be kind of deeply suspicious of that. Like everybody thinks, like that's why I try not to comment on, like everybody makes mistakes and everybody's doing their, like my kids do swimming, the boys do swimming on a Monday, and I bring them and it's a complete nightmare. Like they have to be changed in, changed out, they go into the pool. I have to wait outside with a 1.5-year-old who's now mobile, and it used to be easier, but now she wants to, walk around, and it's hell. And just Monday gone, I had a packet of hula hoops in the swimming bag, which she saw, and they were a prize for one of the kids for some thing at school, and they were open, and she wanted one. She was going mental, and the boys were just getting out of the pool or whatever, and the hula hoops were like, there's a high chair in the changing room. I put her into the high chair. She's gone mental for one of these hula hoops, and I was like, oh fine, here. So I took one hula hoop out and I gave it to her. Of course, I turn around 5 seconds later, she's gagging on this hula hoop, right? And there's a man in the changing room with his kids and whatever, and he just went, it was so irritating. And he's like, I think I'm a bit young for hula hoops, don't you? And I was just like, how annoying are you? But like, yeah, she is probably too young for hula hoops. I made a mistake. She was grand. But like, you know what I mean? You do things, you make mistakes. Like that's what parenting is all about. And people who put themselves up there as these pillars of like, well, the way to do it is to discipline the children, and you do this and you do that, are usually, in my opinion, probably either lying about what they're doing or not the best parents, unfortunately. And that has definitely played out here. There's a couple of other really famous YouTube people I'm not going to name. My sister and I had followed for years, stopped following, and they have a transgender child now. The father has come out as non-binary, and it's mental. And their whole life is on the internet for you to watch. And it's like, are you just like, what's the say nothing for the fact that these children have no consent to their whole childhood being online to millions of views.
There's any number of cases now of sort of child YouTube stars who are coming out and saying what a hell their life was.
Yeah.
Excuse me. And I don't think there's a coincidence in that. I think we're seeing the consequences of sort of a fame-based culture, particularly like the early stage of like we're sort of in the second generation of the internet now, and there were definitely some people who abused themselves in the first generation of it. We're starting to find out the consequences of that, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're kind of up against time, but it's been a fascinating hour of discussion, as always, I think. Thanks very much to those of you who listen to us and watch us on YouTube. Our views on this podcast and our listens are really, really strong, and we're really grateful for that. And we are going to have a program of some interesting guests over the next couple of months. So stay tuned with us as we get to that. But for now, folks, from Sarah and from me, that once again was the week that really was.